The wind was not a whisper, not in the frozen wastelands. It was a scream. A shrill cry that rattled bones beneath skin and filled the silence with dread. Snow danced like ash from a fire long extinguished, covering the dead earth in white lies. Beneath this eternal storm of ice, amid mountains that had forgotten the sun's warmth, a man named Elias trudged forward, his breath ragged, his coat stiff frost, and his soul dragging behind him like a wounded dog. He had come to this place for isolation, to drown the grief that clung to him like a parasite, the kind that eats memories first and sanity last. But what he found here was something else entirely, something not of this world. It started with the signal, faint, not human, just a pulse, like a heartbeat buried beneath miles of snow. He had ignored it at first, mistaking it for an echo of his sorrow. But then it came again, stronger, clearer, a sound like chimes in a cave, metallic, yet melodic, desperate yet patient. The snow had tried to hide it, bury it forever, but the wastelands did not own the secret entirely. Elias followed it, not because he believed in miracles, but because he no longer believed in anything else. He followed it through ice crevices, sharp as razors, across frozen rivers that groaned beneath his feet like dying leviathans. Days blurred into nights, or maybe nights into days. The sky here knew neither mercy nor order. When he reached the crater, he stopped breathing. The edges of it were glassed over with scorched ice, blackened and cracked, as if some infernal god had touched the earth and left a scar. At its center was a wreck, half submerged in frost. Not a ship in any human sense, no wings, no engines. Just an organic shape like a crescent moon carved from obsidian and chrome. The hull pulsed faintly, wounded, like it was still alive. And then he saw her. She was curled up beside it, almost invisible against the snow, except for the impossible glow of her skin, a pale turquoise shimmer that flickered like dying light. A child, no more than 7 in human terms, though her eyes were too old, too knowing. Her fingers were clawed but delicate, her face strange yet heartbreakingly expressive. Her body shook with cold. She was not built to endure. Beside her, a second shape lay still, a taller form, not dead but fading, exhaling shallow, pained breaths into the frozen air, the mother. Her arm was wrapped tightly around the child, even in unconsciousness, a gesture that needed no translation. Elias dropped to his knees, his body stiff, his heart hammering. He wanted to speak, to ask, to shout, but the words were irrelevant in that moment. The child looked up at him with no fear, only hope buried beneath exhaustion. Her lips moved, but the sound that came out was nothing like language. Still, Elias understood. It wasn't words, it was feeling. A plea, please, help her. He knew what this place would do to them. The wastelands were not kind, not even to their own. The cold here did not kill quickly, it stole layer by layer, warmth first, then will, then life. He should have turned back. He had no food to share, no shelter to offer. He had nothing but a broken soul and frostbitten hands, but he could not leave them. He pulled off his coat, the thickest one he had, and wrapped it around the child, pressing her to his chest. She didn't resist. She leaned into him like she had known him for years, like she had always been waiting for him. He could feel her tremble slow, could feel her heartbeat flutter like a bird trying to fly. He looked at the mother. She was barely conscious, her gaze flickering open for a second. She didn't try to attack, didn't speak, just looked at him with an expression Elias hadn't seen in a long time. Not trust. Something deeper. Resignation, as if saying, you can take her. Please, I've held on long enough. The snow screamed louder now, as if angered by Elias's defiance. He would not listen. He would not abandon them. So he lifted the child into his arms, supported the mother against his side, and turned back toward the dead hills from which he came. The storm would fight him every step. His body would beg him to give up. But in that moment, Elias knew something he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife and unborn child beneath the avalanche. He mattered again. He had a reason to bleed. The wastelands had offered him death, but instead he chose love for a creature not of his kind, not of his world, but desperately, painfully alive. And so the long walk began, not just back through the ice and wind, but into something else. Something ancient. Something beautiful. Something human. Asterisk, Elias had no map, only memory, and memory was a fragile compass in a place like this. The blizzard snarled like a living beast, scratching at his face with claws of ice and howling into his ears with voices that weren't his own. The child clung to him, her strange body trembling, her long fingers knotted in the thick folds of his coat, as if terrified he might vanish. The mother was heavier than she looked, her frame slender but dense, her weight Not in flesh, but in what it cost her to keep breathing. Each step Elias took felt like wading through regret, slow, endless, bitter, but he never stopped. He couldn't, not now. He had brought them into the outer perimeter of his shelter by the second nightfall. Though in this place the sky never truly changed, just varying shades of gray and white and black, like an old photograph slowly burning. His cabin was nothing more than a refurbished outpost, a skeletal ruin left behind by the mining corporations years before. But Elias had rebuilt it with his hands in grief, sealing every crack, insulating every corner with cloth, rubber, metal, and time. It was never meant for guests, let alone beings from another world. But he opened the door with shaking fingers and guided them inside like a priest into a sanctuary. The heat from the generator was weak, powered only by salvage and faith, but the moment it kissed their skin, the child whimpered a sound so fragile, so full of stunned relief that Elias almost dropped to the floor and wept. He set her down gently near the heat coils, peeling off his frozen gloves, watching as her luminescent skin absorbed warmth like a starving body drank water. Her eyes closed, lashes trembling, lips parting slightly as her fingers curled in instinctive gratitude. The mother, though she was fading, her breathing shallow, her chest rising too slowly, too unevenly. Elias didn't know anything about their biology, didn't know what would help or hurt, but he moved on instinct. He found his last packet of emergency protein paste and tried to feed it to her. She was too weak to chew, but her mouth moved, tasting it, absorbing what she could. Her eyes opened again just long enough to lock onto his dot. No words passed between them, yet something moved. Elias had lost his wife years ago to a sickness the cold had only accelerated. Watching someone's life disappear from their body while they still looked at you, it was a particular kind of hell. And now he was in it again, only this time he could do something. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket, dragged the heater closer, and adjusted the vent to direct more warmth toward them. The cabin lights flickered. His power reserves were thin. It didn't matter. He would burn the whole system down before he let them freeze again. He watched them through the night, dozing in turns, afraid that if he closed his eyes too long, one of them would be gone. The child woke once, staring at him with those deep, opal-colored eyes that caught the dim light and reflected it back like a promise. She reached out a hand, placed it over his, and held it. Her skin was warmer now, almost human, though the bones beneath felt different, thinner, stronger, like she had been built to survive a different gravity. Elias didn't ask questions, not yet. He didn't need answers to be kind dot in the morning or what passed for morning in a land where the sky forgot how to shine. The mother was better. Not strong, but breathing evenly, her skin no longer a pale blue ghost, but a richer, greener hue. She could sit upright, though her movements were slow and cautious, her eyes never leaving her child. Elias brought them water, fashioned a crude bowl out of tin, and watched as they drank with the grace of desert pilgrims. The mother tried to speak. Her voice was soft, musical, but alien. Still, she repeated the same syllables, gently eyes fixed on Elias. Thought it took him time, but he understood. She was naming herself, or perhaps naming her daughter, or both. The sound was something like Ellen, and when the child repeated it with a wide, joyful look toward Elias, he knew he had heard her first word. Elias said his name too, slowly, Elias. The child repeated it in pieces, then all at once, Elias. Her voice was higher, purer, a bell rung inside a ruined church, and just like that, a bridge formed between them. Not built of language, not fully, but of shared breath, shared warmth, shared survival. That day, Elias scavenged his supplies, recalibrated the generators, and sacrificed his ration bars without hesitation. Not once did he think of leaving them. Not once did he consider that this might be dangerous, that some government or military force might soon come crashing down to erase all traces of these beings. He only thought of keeping them alive, because the moment they entered his life, the ice inside him had started to melt. He had known loss. But now, in their trembling hands, he was rediscovering the cost and the value of life, and in that cost, in that tenderness, humanity was beginning to shine through. Elias woke to the sound of laughter, strange, musical, utterly out of place in the frozen wastelands, where even joy froze in the air before it could reach the ears. It was the child. Ellen, as he now called her, though perhaps it meant something else in her language entirely. She was seated cross-legged by the dying warmth of the heating coils, turning one of his old lighters over in her hands, sparking it gently, watching the flame bloom and die. The wonder in her eyes made Elias stop in the doorway, one hand still resting on the wood, as if afraid stepping into the room would break the spell. The mother, Asha. He had decided to name her, for the word sounded like wind sighing through leaves, like breath returning after a long silence watch, too. Her face was thinner now, but the light behind her eyes was steady, no longer flickering like it had been when he found her. She turned her gaze to Elias and gave a small nod. A greeting, not a thank you, but something older, something deeper. As if to say, I see you. And you see us dot, he moved slowly, not wanting to disrupt their peace, and offered a chipped tin cup of warmed water. Asha took it with delicate fingers, her claw-like nails curling around it without fear. She drank slowly, then passed it to Alan, who mimicked her exactly. The girl turned her eyes to Elias, tilted her head, and in her soft voice said, Lawa's warm. It shattered him more than any avalanche could have. Not because of the words, but because of how she said them, like a memory, like an anchor, like he had become part of her definition of safety. She reached out, touching his wrist with her small, glowing hand, and he felt something pulse there. Not pain, not cold. Something vibrant, like being seen through. They spent days in the cabin, while the storm outside howled against the still walls. Elias repaired the cracked heater vent while Ellen watched him closely, occasionally mimicking his movements. He began teaching her words by pointing and saying them aloud. Fire, metal, sky. She repeated them, her pronunciation. Soft, otherworldly, but each word more certain than the last. One evening, Elias carved a simple bird from driftwood. A little thing, just a shape, its wings curved as if caught mid-flight. He didn't know why he made it, perhaps because she reminded him of birds before winter, fragile and fearless. He handed it to her, unsure if she would understand. But she cradled it with reverence, pressed it against her heart, and whispered something too soft to catch. Then she offered it to Asha, who smiled with tired eyes and tucked it into the folds of her wrap. Later, Alin pulled him to the window. It was caked in frost, but the child placed her hand upon it, and something in the glass changed. Elias didn't know if it was heat, energy, or something more arcane, but slowly the frost thinned, revealing a narrow view outside a sky veined, with auroras, green and violet waves pulsing through darkness like living things. She pointed upward. Home, she said, voice barely a whisper. But gone, fire. Then she looked down. Crash, Mama heard. Her words were broken, but the meaning was clear enough. Something had destroyed their ship, something terrible, something final. And now, Earth was not a visit, but a prison. Elias felt a twisting in his chest at the simplicity of her explanation. This wasn't just a crash, it was exile. Survivors buried in a graveyard of snow. That night, he sat beside the heating coils, carving another shape from wood. This time, a human figure, bent, worn, alone. He didn't know why he was doing it, maybe because Alan saw through the silence he tried so hard to wear like armor. She sat beside him and watched, then reached out and gently took the carving from him. Held it, stared at it, and whispered, El Lacid. He didn't speak, couldn't. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even curious. It was just truth, spoken without shame. She saw what no one else could anymore. She touched his scars without touching his skin. He felt the tears before. He realized they had fallen hot streaks that burned down his face, not from cold, but from the slow thawing of something inside him. He hadn't cried since the day the medics pulled his wife's frozen body from the wreckage and told him. The heartbeat inside her was gone too. He hadn't cried for himself. But now, with a little alien girl sitting beside him, sharing silence, the way others shared bread, he felt his soul begin to uncoil. Asha watched from the corner, her breathing steady, her hand resting gently against her daughter's back. Elias looked up and met her eyes. There was no need for language. The bond had already been woven, strand by strand, through warmth, through survival, through shared silence and sorrow. They were no longer strangers. They were something else now, not just a man and two beings from another world, but a family, forged in the cold, and the fire between them, fragile, flickering, undeniable, kept burning. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The cabin had become a rhythm, a small, delicate pulse of life in a land where nothing should live. Elias would rise early and tend to the generator, ration his remaining fuel, scrape frost from the solar array with numb fingers, even as the sky spit snow like a curse. Olin would wake soon after, rubbing sleep from her luminous eyes and following him like a shadow with curiosity too large for her small frame. Asha healed slowly but surely, her strength returning in hesitant waves. She spoke rarely, her voice reserved for lullabies and quiet reassurances to her daughter, but her eyes told stories in every glance. They spoke of oceans not made of water, skies that change color with emotion, and cities built on beams of sound. Elias didn't need the words. He believed her, but belief does not shelter forever. Not in a world still scarred by the unknown dot. It began with the sound again so faint Elias thought he imagined it. A buzz beneath the floorboards, a tremor in the wind, like something forgotten had awakened. At first, he thought it was the generator, beginning to fail, or the wind playing tricks on his ears. But the sound grew not louder, but more aware. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from the wreck. That evening, he found Asha awake before the sun dipped into its permanent twilight. She sat by the window, her back too straight, her face too still. When he approached, she turned not startled, not afraid, but resolved. She lifted her hand and traced a circle in the air, then pointed to her temple. "I remember," she said, the words cracked and stiff from disuse. Elias crouched beside her. "Remember what?" She closed her eyes, and a string of low, almost humming syllables escaped her lips. They vibrated with something that wasn't just sound. The air felt denser, the warmth less secure. She reached for Ullen, who was asleep curled up near the vent, and pressed a gentle hand to the girl's head. "She beacon," Asha whispered. "She calls." It took Elias a moment. "The signal?" "From before." Asha nodded, and this time her eyes brimmed with something Elias hadn't seen in them yet. Fear. Ellen was the source. Or rather, the wreckage had responded to her. The child's presence had reactivated something buried within. And whatever had come to rest here in the snow hadn't stopped sending out its cry. He grabbed his old receiver, the one he hadn't used since the military had decommissioned the satellite grid above the wastelands, and powered it up. The screen flickered, useless, then blinked. Once, twice, a pulse. An alien rhythm. "Something's listening," Elias muttered, feeling the cold seep not from outside, but inside his chest. Asha turned to him. Her fingers moved quickly, shapes in the air like fragments of meaning. She spoke again, slow and careful. "Not our kind. Enemy. Burned our stars. Followed us through light." He stared at her. "You were running from them?" She nodded, and this time her hand went to her side scar tissue, hidden beneath the fabric, where something had once pierced her. "The childburn in flight. Half light, half shadow," she said, and for the first time Elias saw not just grief in her face, but guilt. They wanted her, he guessed. "She's important," Asha bowed her head. "She is light, pure, untouched by war." Elias stood slowly. The signal had changed now, clearer. His receiver buzzed with patterns too deliberate to be random, like keys turning in unseen locks. "How long?" he asked, "before they hear it?" Asha looked at the window, not to the sky, but to the storm. As if the answer was already there, waiting in the ice. "They're coming." The weight of it was suffocating. Elias felt it in his bones. He had thought the wastelands were exile. Now he understood they were a final hiding place, the edge of the world. And that edge had started to crumble. He paced the floor. "Then we have to shut it down, that signal." "If she's the one sending it," Asha shook her head violently, a spark of anger in her eyes. "No, she is the signal. Her mind, her heart, it is hope. If we silence it, she dies." He stopped cold. Hope and death entwined. Alan stirred, her eyes blinking open as if she'd felt the storm building inside them. She looked from her mother to Elias and crawled into his arms without a word. Her small fingers reached up and touched his chest. "Scared?" she whispered. He held her tight. "No," he lied, because the truth was something darker. It wasn't just about her survival now. This little being had become more than a refugee. She was a torch in a dark universe, and that light was about to draw monsters to the flame. They had little time. The storm would soon carry more than snow, but Elias was no stranger to war, and he would not let her light go out, not while he still breathed. The air changed before the world did. Elias noticed it first in the silence. Not the usual hush of snowfall or the slow hush of wind slithering through cracks in the cabin, but a dead silence, too clean, too hollow, as if something vast and ancient had inhaled and was waiting to exhale destruction. The fire in the stove crackled nervously. The signal receiver buzzed with an anxious frequency, and Ellen clung to Elias as if her dreams knew something the waking world hadn't spoken. Yet, 3 days had passed since the signal had changed, since the wreck pulsed not just with memory, but with intent. Elias had taken them deeper into the mining tunnels, carved under the cabin relics from a time when men had hoped to find value beneath the frost. Now those tunnels were his salvation. With trembling hands and a brain fueled by fear and caffeine, Elias rigged what he could: solar traps, thermal blankets, an escape path through old ventilation shafts. He armed himself with the only things he had left: flares, emergency mines, a rusted bolt-action rifle with 6 precious rounds, and something more dangerous than any weapon, a reason to fight, They needed to leave. That much was clear. The cabin had become a beacon, just as Alan had become one. She could no longer suppress it, not entirely. It radiated from her when she cried, when she laughed, when she slept. Elias could feel it now, like a pulse against his skin, like warm wind blowing through locked doors in his mind. Sometimes she would speak to him, not in words, but with emotions pressed gently into his thoughts. Trust, sorrow, a memory of stars singing, but now her messages were scattered, brittle. Fear laced through everything she projected, and it was not just her own. It was Asha's too. They know, the mother said, her voice rasping in a way Elias hadn't heard before, like a voice pushed through fire and ice at once. They hear her. They are near. How near? Elias asked, his eyes searching the horizon from the shattered glass slit he'd cut above ground dot. Asha touched the floor. Her fingers glowed faintly, then stilled. Hours. Elias cursed under his breath. He had no transport, no way to carry them far, not through the storm, not through the jagged teeth of a land that devoured machines. The wreck was damaged beyond repair, and there was no rescue coming. He stared at Alan, who now played with the wooden bird again, humming a tune he had taught her, unaware of the death racing toward them. She doesn't know, Elias said quietly. Asha shook her head. She knows, but her spirit does not bend, she believes. Elias sat heavily, the rifle clutched between his knees. I don't believe in anything anymore. Not miracles, not gods, not happy endings. Asha placed a hand on his shoulder, soft but steady. Then believe in her? The words hit harder than he expected. Night fell early that day, or perhaps the sky simply gave up on pretending. The blizzard rolled in thick and yellow-gray, not natural, not born of weather. Elias could see shapes within it, moving not like animals but like shadows that remembered how to hate. He triggered the first mines, small ones, just enough to slow a ground approach. The explosions flashed and roared, briefly illuminating skeletal forms too tall, too many-limbed. They didn't scream when torn apart. They clicked, as if annoyed, as if calculating faster routes through pain. Elias pulled Alan close. I need you to be brave, he whispered. You remember what I taught you? The tunnel? The red rope? She nodded, blinking up at him. Run if loud. That's right, he said, choking on the tightness in his throat. Run with Mama, as fast as you can. But you? He kissed her forehead. I'll find you, I promise. It was a lie he needed her to believe. He sent them into the tunnels. He sealed the hatch behind them. Then he faced the door. Outside, the wind screamed, and this time it was not pretending to be anything else. It was the herald of something that did not belong in this world. The steel door buckled once, then twice, then silence again, awful, yawning, hungry. They would not knock. They never did. Elias raised his rifle and stepped forward. Asterisk, asterisk. The moment the steel door groaned and folded inward like paper kissed by flame, Elias knew he was no longer protecting a child. He was protecting the last flicker of a future that had not yet been devoured. The cold rushed in first, but it wasn't the kind that numbed skin or whispered through bone. This cold screamed, wrapping around his lungs and tightening with every breath. It smelled of ash and metal, and something old like forgotten blood. Soaked deep into the roots of the world, they entered without ceremony, the shadows. Tall, jointless things that walked like broken mannequins, reassembled in mockery of life. Their limbs were too long, their heads stretched backward, their faces blank, yet Elias felt them watching him, judging him, as if they had scanned 1,000 minds before and found him lacking. Their steps were weightless but final, the way night falls inevitable and absolute. Elias stood with the rifle in his hands, knowing it was as useful as a prayer and just as desperate. He fired the first shot before the lit creature took a full step past the threshold. The round struck its chest and sent it skidding backward, cracking through the frost-caked table behind it. But it rose without flinching. The hole in its chest hissed, then closed like water smoothing over a wound. So, not weapons then. Not bullets, but the second flare he launched didn't aim for flesh. It struck the ceiling support he'd spent. The last 2 days weakening. A deafening crack split the room as a segment of the roof collapsed onto 2 of the figures. For a moment, he thought it might slow them. For a moment, he thought pain might be universal. He was wrong. They stepped over the rubble like dancers on a stage, unbothered by debris or fire. Their eyes, if those smooth sockets could be called that, glowed faintly now, not with rage, but with interest. They knew. They had found the source. And he, Elias, was nothing more than a door they had to walk through. So he became a wall. He screamed as he charged, not out of rage, but out of defiance, a sound that didn't belong to war or terror, but to grief. He stabbed the flare into the nearest one's neck, and as its body flared in blue fire, he tackled another into the heating unit. Sparks exploded, catching the old wiring. The cabin lit up like a dying star. Heat flooded the room for one brilliant, blinding moment, and Elias saw them fully machines made of hunger, built to erase not just life, but meaning. One of them slammed him into the wall. His ribs cracked. Blood filled his mouth. But he laughed. He laughed. Because pain meant he was still alive. And if he was alive, Ullen still had time to run. They closed in. He was on the ground, vision swimming, hands searching for one last flare, one last tool, one last anything, then light. Not flame. Not artificial. A pulse of warmth exploded. From beneath the floorboards, the shadows paused. Elias blinked through tears and blood, and saw Ellen standing in the center of the shattered room. How she had returned, he did not know. Maybe the tunnels led her back. Maybe she had felt him break. She stood barefoot in the snow-covered ruin, the wooden bird clutched in one hand, her other hand raised toward the shadows. No, she said. One word, one syllable. Spoken not in English, not in her tongue, but in something older. The creatures shuddered. The floor vibrated with a low tone, like a whale's song woven with thunder. Ellen glowed now, not faintly, but fiercely, her skin a beacon of light drawn from stars Elias had never seen. Her eyes, once childlike, now burned with the calm power of something timeless. She stepped toward the shadows, and the snow receded from her. Heat radiated from her small body, not destruction, but truth. The kind that could not be denied. You hurt sky, she whispered, and her voice rippled like wind through steel. You burn homes. No more, the creatures trembled. For the first time, Elias saw it, not arrogance, fear. Asha emerged behind her daughter, weak, leaning against the wall. Her hand moved once, tracing something in the air, a gesture not meant for Elias, but for the universe, a farewell. Or perhaps an invocation. Ellen spread her arms. The wreck outside answered. A blinding column of light erupted through the roof, swallowing the intruders in radiant silence. They did not scream. They ceased. The light erased their outlines like fog dissolving. In morning. Elias shielded his eyes, his breath stolen. When he opened them again, they were gone. All of them, all in collapse to her knees. Elias crawled to her, arms shaking, body broken. "I've got you," he murmured, clutching her close, and for the first time she cried, not in fear, not in pain, but in relief. In the arms of a creature not of her world, she had found something stronger than weapons. Love that stood its ground. Asterisk, asterisk. The world was different after the fire. The wastelands, once so loud with howling winds and ghosted screams, fell into a silence so complete it felt reverent, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Ash floated down with the snow now, slow and weightless, glowing faintly before vanishing into the white. The cabin, half collapsed and blackened with soot, stood like a monument scorched but standing, defiant in the face of forces too vast for human comprehension. Inside, amid the debris and melted frost, Elias lay motionless on a mattress of broken floorboards and cloth. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each inhale a fight, each exhale a promise kept. Alan rested beside him, curled like a cat in winter, her glow now dim but steady. The light she had unleashed was gone, burned away in that moment of resistance, leaving her smaller somehow, quieter. But Elias felt her heartbeat, and that was enough. Asha knelt across from them, her face gaunt and tired, her eyes watching the horizon through the broken wall, where the first sliver of pale gold light broke through the clouds, and impossible. Thing in this forsaken place. The sun hadn't shown its face in months. But now something had changed. She whispered in her own language, a prayer or a goodbye. Elias didn't know which. His ears rang too loud from the explosion of light, his body too bruised to move. But his hand found Ellen's small fingers, and when she grasped his back, warm and firm, he knew this was not an end. Not anymore. When he woke again days, maybe hours later, he found the wreck had shifted. Not repaired, not whole, but awake. The metal that once seemed lifeless now pulsed faintly with light, and new shaped spires or antennae rose, like flowers stretching toward the sky. Asha stood beside it, one hand pressed to the hull, her other wrapped in a crude sling Elias had crafted. She turned when he approached, the snow crunching beneath his weak steps, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. "No more signal," she said finally, her voice rough. "They are gone. She sent them away, far." "Elias." Nodded slowly. When we're come, maybe, but not now. Not for a long time. She paused. They fear her. He looked at the little girl sitting in the snow, building a crude figure out of bent nails and twine. She had taken to sculpting faces now, his face, her mother's, even strange forms that must have come from dreams or memory. She smiled at her work, then up at Elias and waved. He waved back. His body ached, but the smile came easily. You can go home? He asked. Usha's gaze fell. Home gone. We are last. The words hung in the cold air like frost on breath. I'm sorry. He said that. She shook her head. We found this, and you. That is more than ashes. He walked to the wreck with her, brushing ice from the side. The ship vibrated faintly, like it recognized him. A part of it still lived, because a part of Ullin still called, but it wouldn't carry them across stars again. It was sanctuary now, not transport. We stay, Asha said, almost asking. Elias looked out at the snow. At the graveyard of metal and bone, at the horizon, where the sun now hesitated but didn't retreat. You're welcome here, he said. Always. That night, they lit a fire not out of necessity, but for warmth of another kind. Elias told stories, real ones, and lies that used to be legends. He spoke of Earth before the sky turned cruel, before the oceans froze. Ullin listened with wide eyes, leaning into him, sometimes laughing, sometimes quiet. Asha added pieces of her own names of constellations he couldn't see, lullabies with notes that curled like smoke. They didn't talk about what had happened, not the broken creatures, not the light, not the way Elias had screamed when he thought they would. Take her. They didn't need to, because what mattered had survived. A man with nothing left had found something too. Rare to name a reason to stay alive that didn't come from anger or vengeance or war, but from a child who saw him not as protector, but as home. And in return, he had learned what humanity truly meant, not the strength to fight monsters, but the courage to stand anyway, even when broken, even when afraid. To shelter those who didn't belong, not because it was safe, but because it was right. In the heart of the frozen world. A new fire had been lit. Not one that burned, but one that warmed, and it would never go out again.